the one who is going to inherit Israel, who's going to inherit the throne, inherit the land, he's coming back. All right, it's Tuesday, word from the Word, and we're cutting this one close. This one will be out here in about a couple days. Just got done with this fall schedule. I'm home for the rest of the month of December, and I really am excited, obviously, to be home with my family, and so I'm tired. I'm tired. It's been a long fall. But I'm excited to be at home, and I'm really excited to get into this study of eschatology. And I had a young guy today. I was playing disc golf this morning, played in a tournament, played terrible. Played so bad. My putting is so horrible. So anyway, but there's this guy, and I was telling him about, we were just talking, you're on a course for 2 hours and 2.5 hours, and you're throwing discs around, you're just chatting. And our YouTube channel come up. He'd heard about it from some of the other guys that I play in the league with. And I said, I'm going to be teaching on eschatology. He's like, what? I've never even heard of that word. So I probably need to pick a new word for this series. But eschatology is just a study of the end, the last days. It's the end of an era. It's an end of an age before a new age. That's happened before. With an old covenant season and into a new covenant season, everything is different. And so that'll happen again at the coming of Jesus. We'll enter into a new age. And there's going to be a lot of stuff taking place. And so, that's what we're really looking at. And I want to get this done. I mean, typically we do Tuesday as a word from the Word, and it's shorter. And then Thursday is a longer teaching. And I try to keep those at 30 minutes they can go upwards to 45. But it's really important. I mean, some of the stuff we just need to break down. And, we can put it out on the, in the kind of in the playlist and in the back, and people can go and reference it later. But what I'm considering, in fact, I've already considered what I'm going to do, not this week that you're watching this, but next week on Tuesday and Thursday. And then for the next 3 or 4 weeks, we're just going to go teaching sessions twice a week until we get through all of this stuff in eschatology, all this stuff concerning the end times. There's just so many people asking questions, especially when this, war started with Israel. People are, they're everywhere talking about it, but I had my handful of people that were flooding my email and social media message box with, what does this mean? And all of that kind of stuff. And then you have things that you just got to be very careful. We come back to what the scriptures say. I'm pretty tight on the scriptures, obviously. And so you just got to be careful. Not everything you read out there is legit. So I wanted to start this video and give some parameters. I want to talk to you about, biblical prophecy. Biblical prophecy, the prophecy that was given that's recorded in Scripture, is different than the prophetic given through believers today. Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians chapters 12, 13, and 14, and many other places, there were New Testament prophets, people who operated in the prophetic. The fivefold ministry of the current church that's here today in Ephesians chapter 4 is apostle, prophet, evangelist, or is it teacher? Evangel, shepherd, teacher. That's what it is. But the prophet is in there. That's not like the prophet in the Old Testament. The prophet in the Old Testament did not have God living within them in this unique kind of relationship where you shared the same body like we do. Like God lives in your body, literally. You share the same body. You share the same brain. And his thoughts go through your mind. Not every thought that goes through your mind belongs to you. So it's just a different deal. In the Old Covenant, it wasn't like that. God came and spoke to them. They heard him audibly. And then they went and communicated that. And they were to communicate. It was a special gifting that everything he said, they would say it word for word. It was like giving a prophetic deal. And then it was recorded. And why that's so important is because prophecy in Scripture, it was so significant that if a prophet ever said anything, that did not come to pass, they were not to just, disregard his writings. But if he was still around, they were to kill him. So it was like a big deal. That's not New Testament. Paul says we prophesy in part. We don't always get it right. Okay. But because we're hearing, it's a different day. It's a different kind of prophecy. The old covenant prophecy that's recorded in scripture it's what we consider all scripture. It's God breathed. It's true. You're not going to come into scripture and say, well, maybe he won't come back. That's not an option. Okay. That's not, you have to throw out everything in Christianity, throw out everything in the Bible, throw out God, if that's the conclusion you come to. Okay. So the scriptures are like a really big deal. Prophetic, scripture is a really big deal. It's really like kind of concrete. Okay. That's the first thing. So it's different than modern, prophetic. The second thing that I want to stress is that prophecy, hear this. Okay. So whatever you're doing, pause, listen to this. Prophecy was never given. Scriptural prophecy was never given so that you would know when something would happen. This is not used that way. Prophecy was given so that when it happened, you would know that it happened. And those are different. So listen again. Prophecy was not given so you would know when something would happen. Prophecy was given so that when it happened, you know that it happened. That's why prophecy was given. All throughout the New Testament, that's how Jesus talks about prophecy. He says, and we'll cover this in this course, Matthew chapter 24, even into verse 25 or chapter 25. He's like, listen, when you see this, do this. When you see that, do that. Like it's really specific. It's when you see these kinds of things, you know that the end is near. You know that this is about to happen. You know that trouble is coming, that kind of a thing. So that's why prophecy was given. Biblical prophecy, was given for the purpose that he wanted you to know the season in which you're living. And that's so significant. It's going to be a really key element to understanding Revelation. You're going to meet all kinds of people who say, well, no one really knows. Well, I don't want to be too critical. I want to be polite, but they say things because they haven't studied. Because that's clearly not how Paul says some pretty direct things to the church in Thessalonica. And we're going to get to that here just in a few weeks. He says, you're going to know that the end is near when you see the Antichrist. He actually says that. When you see these things come to pass, do this. Like Jesus talked that way. Paul talked that way. The early church, this idea that we as God's children, he doesn't want us to know what's going on. That's just so bizarre. Like we've been invited into the business of the kingdom. He wants us to know the season. Jesus criticized Israel because they didn't know the season in which they were living. So you and I are supposed to know the season. We're supposed to know what's going on. We're not going to know the day nor the hour. And we're going to get to that phrase and what that means. It's a reference to the fifth Mosaic feast, the festival of trumpets. They didn't know when that festival would happen. But this idea that it's this kind of carte blanche statement that, no one really knows. And that's just not biblical. That's just not true. It's not what it says. So I want to go through those kinds of things. But I want to say that not everything you see going on, like there will be, and you really have to be careful because the moment I hear someone start to talk about, well, listen, look, this prophecy here, so this is about to happen, this is going to happen, I just turn the channel. I just literally scroll past them because it's unbiblical. That's where you get into false prophecy. It's ugly business because that's never, and pretty much every scholar that's credible that I study, and there's most, if not all of them say that, quite frankly, that, this date setting kind of an idea is just no one knows the day or the hour. Jesus didn't even know the day nor the hour. Only the Father knows. So we're not going to know the day or the hour. Prophecy wasn't given so we would know when something would happen. We're supposed to know the season. Okay. We're supposed to be able to look around and say, hold on here. I recognize some of this. We're supposed to know the season. We can see things taking place. But in terms of events, people's specific wars, you will know when it happens by the prophecy that's been given. You're going to be like, oh, that's it. Okay. That's what we're getting into. Okay. So this is getting too long already, but I want to look with you this, today, this Tuesday, out of Isaiah 66. And this is, I chose to look at this. I wasn't even going to look at it because there's so much we can't look at. I want you guys through this whole course. I'm going to give you some extra things to study. You're going to have to search this out. Your hunger for understanding the season in which you're living and what's going on. It should spur you on to study, not just to, show up and watch a YouTube video and give me all the answers kind of a thing. Okay. So, we can't look at everything in scripture regarding the end times. There's just more said in the Bible about Jesus' second coming than his first coming. It's just how that works. But there's a few things I think it's important. Isaiah 66 is extremely important. And there's several passages in Isaiah. And by the way, in Ezekiel, I want to get through Ezekiel 36, 37, 38, and 39 with the Gog and Magog war. Just don't know if we're going to get to it. I don't know if I want to look at that, honestly. But Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Isaiah, those are the major prophets and many of the minor prophets. I mean, there's some things in there that's said that's just incredible. I mean, that you should study. I don't know if they're, in terms of the level of what we need to look at, if they'll fit. They're kind of second tier prophetic stuff. But this is important. And Isaiah 66, why I want to cover it, won't take long. It's only 24 verses. And it is the re-emergence of Israel. And if you've been around church any amount of time, or if you're familiar with prophecy, scriptural prophecy, you've heard this. If you haven't, you're about to hear it. But Israel is known as a timepiece. It is a prophetic timepiece that when biblically, Israel comes back on the scene, you might have heard, if you again been around any kind of teachings on prophetic, that there is this prophetic on eschatology, end times prophecy stuff. When Israel comes back on the scene, that generation right there, okay, that generation, Jesus references it. There's ties to that kind of statement with the fig tree, that generation won't pass away. There's something significant about Israel, and it talks about it blatantly. In the last chapter of Isaiah, this is what God gives Isaiah to give. So let's go through this really quickly, and I got a little outline here. He begins with just the first couple verses, in Isaiah chapter 66, verses 1 and 2, that basically, because this is a time when the temple is going to be destroyed, and God is encouraging Israel, because this is right, at the Babylonian captivity is coming. And Isaiah comes and says, listen, don't be too attached to the buildings and stuff. I never intended to live in a building. Listen how he says this. This is what the sovereign Lord says, verse 1. Heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house you will build for me? Where will my resting place be? Has not my hand made all things, and so they came into being? So, literally, come on. I already created, I already created you. And he gets into that in verses 2 and 3. I created you to dwell in, basically. In fact, I think he says this at the end of verse 2. This is the one I esteem. He who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. And so he goes into the kind of person that, that he's in love with. And of course, he'll build down into a new covenant time period. Incidentally, him living inside of us. This is really important because when he says, I didn't come to dwell in a building. I didn't come to dwell in houses. Okay. That's a part of an old covenant system. And when Israel reemerges, you're going to see it here. When Israel emerges, this is the prophecy Isaiah is saying. Because again, Israel's going to be destroyed. They're going to be exiled to Babylon. They're going to be devastated. And Isaiah is like, listen, don't be too devastated in all of this. Because all of that relationship, old covenant relationship with God, what is passing away. There's a new day coming. And Isaiah has been full of this all the way since, back to the early chapter 50s, probably 52, up to this point. He's talking about a new covenant that God's going to make. So if you've read Isaiah, and you should, that will become plain. But he's speaking to them that when Israel will come back on the scene, in the latter days, in the end times, Israel is going to emerge not within an old covenant time period, but in a new covenant time period. So this is what he says in verse 2. Listen, this is the one that I'm after. Verse 3, and in those days, whoever sacrifices a bull is like one who kills a man. Whoever offers a lamb is like one who breaks a dog's neck. That's severe. Whoever makes a grain offering is like one who presents pig's blood, and whoever burns memorial incense is like one who worship idols. So basically saying, you're not going to do that. In fact, it's an offense to me because Jesus and our relationship with him in a new covenant has replaced that. So that's really important that you kind of get that kind of perspective. This whole context of Israel, as you'll see in a second, as it's going to emerge back on the scene, is emerging in a day when that's not, that way to worship God is no longer acceptable. There's a whole different kind of relationship that God desires. So he moves down, and I don't know if we're going to go through all this, but basically, verses 2-4, God rejects the former things, the old covenant. Verses 5-6, that's probably important. He's going to repay the enemies. There's some really significant language here. In verse 5, he says, hear the word of the Lord, you who tremble at his word. Your brothers who hate you and exclude you because of my name have said, and they say some things, God's like, I'm going to judge them. I'm coming after them. But you'd have to say, why brothers? All that's going on over there in the Middle East all comes back to Abraham. Abraham, of course, we know as Christians and Jews, of course, Abraham had Isaac and Isaac had Jacob. But there were other kids in there, namely Ishmael, which was the whole debacle that, Ishmael came on the scene with the servant, the son of the servant, Hagar and all of that kind of mess. And so Ishmael, was not going to share in the the promise. And we covered a little bit of that, and you go back and read all that. But so that's where the Muslims come from. And that's why Muslims, and Jews argue over the Holy Land, because they come back, to Abraham. But, the Bible tells us that God is the Jewish God, not Allah, the Muslim God, okay? Because they claim Abraham worshiped Allah. And, of course, we know that, Abraham worshiped the one true God and the son of faith, who is Isaac. So these are the brothers he's talking about. It's going to be Isaac. And then you have, of course, Jacob and Esau, who are born from Isaac. Esau is where you get the Palestinians. And so they're all in the family. And they all come back, Jacob got the birthright from Esau. And so, Esau has rights as well. And that's why you often have Jews that, war with Palestinians. At times, Palestinians are at war with Muslims, and it's just one big mess over there. That's, you get into some of that language here. It's not really unpacked in full, but that's what scholars say. And it really fits the context when he says your brothers. All the things that the Arab nations have done to Israel, they're going to, those people are going to be judged. God's going to come against them. So that's in verses 5 and 6. Then you come down in this section from verse 7-14, where God is going to bring forth Israel, and then he's going to care for Israel. Listen to this language. So 1948, May 17th, I think, Israel was born in one day. Like one day. You can Google it. You can go back and read about it. Israel was born in a day. And we had these kinds of prophecies, and no one knew what to do with them because for 2,000 years, Israel was not here. In fact, there were theologies that were developed where, people said that the church, basically assumed Israel's position and all the kind of things. And then one day Israel's born and everybody's like, there they are. And listen to what it says beginning in verse 7. This is so cool. Before she goes into labor, she gives birth. Before the pains come upon her, she delivers a son. Who has ever heard of such a thing? Who has ever seen such a thing? Can a country be born in a day, or a nation be brought forth in a moment? Yet no sooner is Zion in labor than she gives birth to her children. And then he says in verse 9, and do I bring to the moment of birth and not give delivery? Do I close up the womb when I have brought to delivery? In other words, I've got plans. I've got plans. There's the reason that Israel is coming back on the scene for this hour is to settle the whole promise to the patriarchs and the time of Jacob's trouble taught in Daniel, which we're going to get into in just like maybe next week. We're going to go through the whole book of Daniel. It's really good. And like all that God had promised the patriarchs and the 7 years of tribulation where Israel is at the center of that, he's referencing there's purpose. When Israel comes back on the scene and born in a day, a nation, a self-governing nation, which had never happened. Never happened except, back for the time of David. And you had some kings, but they were always under oppression in the Old Testament. But specifically, especially up until the time of the Babylonian exile, you did not have the people of God that were governing themselves after that point. So that's been what, almost 3,000 years, 2,600 years, something like that. So this is really significant language, and it's not language that can be fulfilled. When Isaiah gave this, there's no time this prophecy, let me say this slowly. When Isaiah gave this, there's no time from the time he gave it until now where this can be fulfilled. It had to be fulfilled in 1948. They became a nation. And it's not like, well, they might get defeated and in exile. That's not what he says, because in verses 7 and 8, he says, can a nation be born in a day? They're going to be born again. And then he says in verse 9, I've got purpose for you. And then from verse 10 all the way down through verse 14, he says, you're never going to go into captivity again. I've got purpose for you. And what's that purpose? It's intimately linked, which is why we're talking about this, the second coming of Jesus, the Messiah. Verse 15, see, the Lord is coming with fire, and his chariots are like a whirlwind. He will bring down his anger and fury and his rebuke with flames of fire. For with fire and with sword, the Lord will execute judgment upon all men, and many will be those slain by the Lord. You can't look at this, especially as we go on and say, well, God's always saying he's going to judge the nation. No. He's going to judge this nation, or he's going to judge their enemies. But this is all men. In fact, when you come down, what settles this is the Messiah coming is the terminology that's used. It's not just God, it's the Lord that comes. In verse 17, listen to this language. Those who consecrate and purify themselves to go into the gardens, that's the good people, followed with them the ones in the midst of those who eat the flesh of pigs and rats and other abominable things. They will meet their end together. In other words, the end of all things, they're going to meet that, like their days will come to an end. You're going into an eternity at that point. Those people are coming together. And then he says in verse 18, and I, because of their actions and their imaginations, am about to come and gather all nations and all tongues, and they will come and see my glory. And so you get the details of verse 19, 20, and 21 on judgment. God is going to judge all the nations. And then he says in verse 22, as the new heavens and the new earth that I make will endure before me, so will your name and descendants endure. So he's telling Israel, listen, I've got purpose for you. And the purpose in the latter days, in the end of times, eschatology, when Israel comes on the scene, I've got purpose for you. And it's not purpose, like that I'm going to accomplish through you. I've got purpose of bringing you on, because the one who is going to inherit Israel, who's going to inherit the throne, inherit the land, he's coming back. And he's going to make himself king there, and he's going to judge the whole world. The whole heavens and earth is going to be made new. We're going to enter into a millennial time period, and then that'll actually be for the new heavens and the new earth. And then you're going to have dwelling. So why Israel? And of course, I probably should finish it. He comes down in verse 23 and 24, and he says, from one new moon to another, and from one Sabbath to another, all mankind will come and bow down before me, and they will go out and look upon the dead bodies of those who rebelled against me. These are those he's punished, and their worm will not die, nor will their fire be quenched, and they will be loathsome to all mankind. So literally, that's eternal judgment. Okay, what's the significance of Isaiah 66? I encourage you to read it and study it. Israel is a timepiece. And we've heard that for years. We've kind of, it didn't make sense until 1948, but when they came back upon a scene, it confirms how we view prophecy. Prophecy does not, this passage that Isaiah gave did not tell us when it would happen. What it did tell us is that when it happened, we'd know that it happened. And in May 17th, 1948, we knew it happened. Israel became a nation. Everything that was written here, everything Isaiah said came to pass. And then what's so important for you and I, hear this, what's so important for you and I is now that Israel's back on the scene, you just can't take the chapter apart, and look at one half of it without the other. The whole chapter is what makes Isaiah 66 so important. The whole chapter goes together, because with Israel coming, the purpose of God is the reason Israel's coming back on the scene is not for Israel. The reason for Israel's coming back on the scene is the one who's going to inherit the throne is coming back. So the Re-Emergence of Israel and the second coming of Jesus are events that are linked. You're like, what are you trying to say? That the coming of Jesus is soon? Absolutely. 100%. You'll hear people say, well, it's not going to happen for another, it might not happen for another couple hundred years. It's not just Isaiah 66. You need to read. This is not how it's talked about. Israel, the land, does not belong to Israel. Definitely doesn't belong to Palestinians, and it doesn't belong to, Europeans, doesn't belong to other Muslims, other Arabs. It doesn't belong to us. It doesn't even belong to Israel. They're stewards of it, but that land belongs to Jesus, to King Jesus. He is the one that's going to come and sit on the throne of David. And that's what this chapter is about. Israel is raised up and they're prepared for him, and they're going to see their king come back. And that's what we're going to get to in some of Romans chapter 11. Jesus talks about it in the Gospels and, of course, in Revelation. And so we got a lot to get into. So I'm super excited about it. And I just want to make sense of some of this and kind of if you would just, if you just kind of journey with me on this and even study it with me, I think you're going to see some significant elements of what God has said concerning the day and age in which you and I live. It's astounding. So Isaiah 66, good stuff. See you on Thursday. Whoa!